time. Thank you so much. Thank you.
Welcome back to ILTV on the Hour. I'm Alec Pollard, coming to you live from Israel with the biggest headlines from across the region. Talks between the U.S. and Iran are set to begin tomorrow in Muscat, Oman, following Iran's successful effort to shift the location from Turkey and have bilateral negotiations only, without other nations, focused solely on the nuclear issue. This after Turkey brokered a clear framework for talks in Istanbul, including a broader regional track dealing with Iran's ballistic missiles, support for terror groups, and human rights abuses following recent protests inside Iran. President Trump said the U.S. remains open to talks, but has warned of grave consequences if Iran does not halt its nuclear weapons pursuits and regional proxies. Last night, Trump said Tehran's supreme leader, Ali Khamenei, should be very concerned, warning Iran against building new nuclear facilities, but stressed that negotiations are still underway. Now, in a series of precise intelligence-driven strikes on Wednesday, the IDF eliminated 3 senior terror operatives from Hamas and Palestinian Islamic Jihad, all directly linked to the October 7th massacre and recent attacks on IDF forces. Muhammad Issam Hassan al-Habil was killed in a precise airstrike in Gaza City's Shati refugee camp in response to an attack on IDF forces in northern Gaza, in which a reserve officer was seriously wounded by Palestinian gunfire, a blatant violation of the ceasefire. According to Shin Bet interrogations, al-Habil was directly responsible for the murder of IDF captive Noa Marziano after she was abducted from the Nahal Oz outpost during the October 7th Hamas massacre. The IDF says the operation was made possible by extensive intelligence collection by the Gaza Division, the same division in which Noa Marziano served, describing the strike as a significant closing of the circle for her family, the army, and the security services. Other casualties were Ali al-Ghazayne, commander of Palestinian Islamic Jihad's Northern Gaza Brigade, who held hostages in Gaza, as well as Hamas Nukba Force commander Bilal Abu-Asi, who led the invasion of kibbutz Nir Oz on October 7th. An IDF statement said these strikes send a clear message. Any terrorist involved in the October 7th massacre, in hostage-taking or in attacks on Israeli forces will be found and eliminated. The IDF released drone footage Wednesday confirming what Israel has warned about for months: Hamas using civilian and medical cover to move weapons and fighters. Routine drone operations in the Jabalia area of northern Gaza captured Hamas gunmen using an ambulance to transport arms and operatives. The IDF says those transfers took place between a hospital and a school, both civilian sites. The footage shows armed men moving around the ambulance at 2 separate locations, clear visual proof of Hamas's systematic abuse of humanitarian infrastructure. The army says that since the ceasefire began, Hamas has continued to violate the agreement and focus on rebuilding its military capabilities. And joining us now is Dan Pfefferman, a former IDF intelligence officer and co-editor of Middle East 24. Thank you for joining us, Dan.
Yeah, glad to be here. Thank you.
Great. So I'll first talk about Iran and then go over to Gaza. It looks like a U.S. strike was imminent in Iran, but now it's unclear. Was this all a negotiation tactic? Did Trump get cold feet, or is he weighing his options? What do you make of it?
Right. So analysts have been terming this either FAFO or taco, right? Trump always chickens out or F around and find out.
Yeah.
And something that Trump himself, as an individual and the administration, have done very effectively is that he sometimes very much comes through on his threats and promises and leaving adversaries, allies, and bystanders alike to wonder what he's going to actually do. And I think this is a key part of his strength as a world leader, as a negotiator, right? Amass forces. Oftentimes the most important leverage that you can bring to the table is the credible threat of force. And if the adversary believes you might actually use it, then it's a very credible threat of force. And of course, the United States, I believe, this administration, I think a lot of Trump's constituency would like to see this resolved diplomatically. The question is, and the big question is how much can you actually diplomatically squeeze out of this regime in Tehran? This is an absolutely radical regime. And the big question is not just getting them to the table, but can America achieve its goals via negotiations with a very big stick and not just carrots? And that's the question to be had here.
Yeah, definitely. Trump's always been like that, sort of keeping all his options on the table, unpredictable. You don't know what he's going to do. And then he sort of chooses a lane. But it's really a question about negotiations. As you said, what can you get out of this regime? Nuclear negotiations have been going on for 30 years. We know they're pursuing a nuclear weapon. You can delay them with various measures, inspections, and so forth. But surely they're just going to continue. And now it seemed like was the chance to really maybe, possibly bring the regime down. But obviously there's also internal considerations for Trump inside the Republican Party about taking, decisive action. That's not so popular in the Republican Party.
It's not, and of course, first of all, there's not a clear alignment of what the Americans want to achieve versus what the Iranians might, at the very most, be willing to even talk about. So the Iranians intimated that they have in the past been willing to at least discuss the nuclear regime when they're pushed into the corner. The economy is absolutely in the worst case that it's been in absolute decades, and of course the protesters in the streets. So the regime is seeking a lifeline, it's seeking survival here, and when it has been pushed into the corner, it's at least willing to pretend to talk to the United States, to talk to the West. But Trump and the United States are very correctly seeking not just a freeze or an end to the nuclear program, but also an end to the ballistic missile program and Iran's deadly and disastrous support for proxy groups and radical groups around the Middle East. And those seem to be red lines from Iran's perspective. Those are lifelines. Those are part of its raison d'etre, its very identity as an exporter of the revolution, in its own words. And so, will Iran even agree to come to the table? Will it agree to discuss? And then the big question, of course, on the American side that we don't have an answer to is, let's say in some fantasy world, the regime in Tehran, Khamenei, the supreme leader, are willing to put a hold, or at least pretend to, on the nuclear program, even the missile and the proxy support. What does that mean? Is that something that the United States is willing to accept? Or with the regime so frail and teetering as it is right now, is the United States going to actually push for some kind of regime change? Or the most interesting scenario that's come up in the last few weeks that we maybe never thought to discuss but should, is sort of a Venezuela Maduro-like scenario where the United States, amasses all of this force much closer to Iran, comes in, extracts or assassinates the supreme leader and maybe some of the more hardcore ideological leadership of Iran, and then finds, maybe some leadership in the IRGC who are much more pragmatic, much more amenable. So you're not talking about regime change, but regime alteration, if you will. And so there are different scenarios, there's different ranges. It's really not clear where the United States is right now, but there are a lot of options on the table. And to some extent, the ball is sort of in Tehran's court right now. Okay, so it's willing to come to the table. It's willing to talk about the nuclear program. Is it willing to talk about the rest of America's demands or not? Is it going to continue executing protesters and political prisoners? And then is it going to maybe launch a preemptive strike on Israel, which is also in the cards and in the scenario here that we need to look at? And then how does the U.S. respond to that? So there's just a lot of ifs. There's a lot of big question marks hovering in the air right now.
Right. And also just a final question on Iran, which is those protesters, the demonstrations, the mass uprising against the regime that was brutally suppressed with so many people who were killed. And now what we're seeing inside Iran is that they've succeeded. They've succeeded in suppressing the uprising. They've gotten the breathing room that they wanted. What do you make, maybe, or I don't know if you've heard anything from sort of Iranian dissidents, exiles, about the mood inside Iran among the population, whom Trump said help is coming? Is this help?
So we haven't seen that help so far, and we're covering this, 24/7 on our platform, Middle East 24, including from sources inside Iran. What you see, first of all, the very brutal, very dramatic repression of the protesters seems to have worked in the short term. As you said, it gave the Iranian regime some breathing space. It estimated that 30,000, maybe more, were massacred in a number of days. That's really unheard of. That's a lesson that this regime might have learned from Syria or from other similar kind of uprisings, is put down uprisings brutally and quickly. The question, and so the protesters seem to have kind of, all right, we need to step back, we need to regroup. And what you're seeing now is that key points, whether it's funerals or certain gatherings, that's where you're seeing this sentiment, this anti-regime sentiment, this kind of hope, certain chants, certain cries for the downfall of the regime. But the mass protests that we saw in the streets just a couple of weeks ago, you're not seeing that as much, because unfortunately the regime did come in with brute force. It brought in Hezbollah, it brought in its militias, Arab militias from Iraq and from Lebanon, to gun down tens of thousands of protesters. And so that has had the effect of deterring mass protests in the street for now. But clearly this is something that is bubbling and bubbling and bubbling, and it's going to spill over the cauldron, so to speak. And the question is what can the U.S. do to that? I think part of the reason why the U.S. hasn't done anything, the promise of coming to their aid, which was unfortunate because it got protesters out in the streets, is that the U.S. didn't come to their aid. And I think the U.S. is going to see, it's not some kind of small matter for the U.S. to get involved in Iran. So the U.S. is going to choose to do that if and when it feels that military action will actually help tilt the needle, push it over the edge, maybe actually help the protesters in Iran. And if it feels that it's not going to actually achieve anything, then there's not really a whole lot of point in taking such a risk.
Let's move over to the situation in Gaza. First of all, we see fighting is still ongoing. All the assessments from Israeli intelligence is that fighting is going to continue because Hamas are still armed, taking out some of those terrorists who were involved in October 7th. From the Israeli perspective, that it doesn't end. There's no timeline at which, after 1 year, 2 years, 3 years, where you committed such attacks and you're safe. What do you make of these recent operations where, closing, getting revenge, so to speak, that circle on those people who were perpetrators of October 7th, hostage taking, and even murdering of an Israeli hostage?
Right. And so I think the key thing is here, the war never ended, right? We have a ceasefire. The war nominally ended. The pressure on Israel was off. The hostages thankfully came home. There was a price to pay as far as releasing Palestinian security prisoners, convicted terrorists. But the war didn't end in that sense. New lines were drawn. Israel controls over 50%, 53% of the territory, but only a small percentage of the population, whereas Hamas, or what replaced those fighters that were killed by Israel in the 2 years of the fighting, were replaced predominantly by teenagers, essentially, and people who are far less trained, but they're still powerful enough to instill terror, thugs, so to speak, on the population of Gaza, and then, of course, commit these random kind of terrorist attacks against Israeli forces in the Gaza Strip. So the war didn't end, and the phase we're in now is this kind of tit for tat, where Israel is basically given a green light to go in a pinpoint manner after terrorists, after terrorist movement. If the IDF senses infrastructure rebuilding, that's where it's going in, and keeping Hamas at a level where it doesn't really pose a threat, certainly to Israel, but even to IDF troops stationed in Gaza right now. And the big question is what happens now as we're supposed to be shifting into the second phase of the ceasefire? Who are these international forces that are supposedly going to come in? They're not going to face off against Hamas. There's absolutely no question that nobody except the IDF is going to face off and take on Hamas. But will they do enough to secure the non-Hamas 53% of Gaza so that the second phase, the transitional phase, can begin in that part of Gaza?
And of course, in this transitional phase, we know one of the things that's going to happen is that a lot of humanitarian aid, a lot of resources, money potentially is going to be poured into Gaza. And there is a concern that that's going to be used to strengthen Hamas, Islamic Jihad, and other groups. As we saw in this recent video, drone footage showing them stealing aid, showing them using ambulances, using civilian infrastructure. That is a major concern for Israel, and it's very hard to find a mechanism that solves that issue.
Well, so the one mechanism that we need to be looking at, and this is where the leadership of the United States and also the government of Israel is going to have to really stand strong on this, is that the all the aid, the reconstruction, the materials needs to come into the part of Gaza that is not Hamas dominated, and that's the 53% that the IDF currently controls. And again, only a small, something like 10%, 20% tops of the Gazan population lives in those areas. But the kind of right formula, if you will, at this time would be to ensure that any kind of reconstruction, aid, jobs, governance goes into those parts of Gaza that are Hamas free, and to continue insisting that no part of Gaza will be rebuilt, reconstructed, anything beyond basic humanitarian aid, so long as Hamas controls the area. Said other ways, to insist on there will be no construction unless there is disarmament. And of course, there have been talks of plans to offer, in exchange for bringing in your weapons, you get some kind of amnesty. And that is, something that worked in places like Northern Ireland. It's a big question of if it can work in Gaza with a group with an enemy like Hamas. But I think that's the key thing that the IDF and the United States really need to be pushed to uphold. There will be no reconstruction without disarmament. The Hamas-free part of Gaza, we can go ahead and move on with that, and to ensure, therefore, that Hamas is not getting its hands on reconstruction material so it can go back to doing tunnels, rockets, etc., to make sure that the smuggling avenue of arms coming back into the Gaza Strip via Egypt or other places is absolutely shut down. And, basically kind of wait Hamas out, let them languish, let public pressure continue to build. It's unfortunate for the Gazans who live in those areas. But so far, and unless someone is willing to go in and actually face Hamas, which no one is, and no one wants to let the IDF do that, and it's not even clear that the IDF wants to do that, that's the kind of formula we're stuck with.
Final question regarding the opening of Rafah crossing, because you mentioned it there concerning Egypt. We've seen sort of minimal movement there in and out. How does this affect the situation in Gaza?
Right. So we're talking about opening up freedom of movement for Gazans, who's going to come in, who's going to come out. The lifeline. The lifeline is really important here. We've got someone talking on the other line here. We need to mute them. We need to make sure that there is a lifeline, that there is freedom of movement for those Gazans who are not Hamas. At the same time, I think the key thing needs to be here, both by the IDF, by the United States, who's supposed to oversee this entire mechanism, and a lot of pressure on Egypt to make sure that no fighters, no Hamas terrorists, no arms are flowing in through Rafah. That was one of the big problems we had prior to October 7th, is that not the above ground Rafah crossing, but the below ground Rafah crossing, which was in large part managed by Egypt on the other side, oversaw billions of dollars of goods, of which Hamas taxed heavily, people, fighters, but also arms. And so we need to make sure that that smuggling avenue does not return. And you need a lot of positive pressure here on Egypt from the United States, and other actors here, also from Israel, to ensure that it doesn't return to being a massive smuggling avenue. If civilians want to come in and out, if goods want to come in and out to the non-Hamas side, that's great. I think it's a positive thing. I think you need to have breathing room for those non-Hamas Gazans. It just needs to be overseen very carefully so that it's not abused again.
All right, Dan Pfefferman, co-editor of Middle East 24. Thank you very much for those insights.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Now this week, the IDF presented the main points of a new General Staff Directive regulating the service of ultra-Orthodox soldiers in the IDF, with the goal of allowing them to serve while maintaining an intense religious lifestyle. But this is amid a tense political backdrop over Haredi conscription that is threatening to tear Netanyahu's coalition apart. So what does the ultra-Orthodox community think of this new measure? I'm joined now by Yankee Farber, Haredi journalist, to try and get some more insights. Yankee, thank you very much for coming on.
Yes, so too much information, about the IDF situation. We can speak like for 24 hours on one go, and we will still have a lot to talk. But basically, the Haredi community is against the law, is against the draft law. They don't want it. They don't support it. Because there is sanctions in it, and also because there is numbers that the Haredi community must give every year to the IDF, and they don't want it. But they don't have another choice. And I can see the Haredi community is having a lot of, inside, they don't get on with each other. Every rabbi has a different opinion. Everybody's pulling to a different side. I don't know how it's going to end. I don't see that the law will pass. I don't see that the Haredim will support it, because you've got to understand, if this law goes through by the Knesset, it means that the rabbis have officially given permission to join the IDF. This is something that they can never, ever, ever do. Even not one single Haredi will join the IDF because of this law. So, but it's like, it's a say. We say you can join the IDF. This is something, I don't know how it's going to end. I don't see it happening. What I do see, that the Haredim will vote for the budget till the end of March. Then the budget must go through. And after that, they will leave the government officially and will go on election, probably like in 3 months later. So what we see, that the Haredim say we want the law. What I know, what I hear, and you could see that some of the Knesset members didn't vote for the budget. So they played the game because they knew the budget is going to go through. But you must understand, for the Haredi community, the budget is much more important than the draft law. Because the budget, if the budget doesn't go through, they're not getting any money to the schools, to the kindergarten, to, anything, and they will be in big trouble. That's why I think they will vote for the budget and then go on election.
What do you make of this new directive, though? What's new? What does it change from what was already in place as far as how the IDF accommodates Haredi soldiers in its ranks?
Well, it's very good. That I can say. In my time, there wasn't such things, but we still got all the conditions that we needed to stay religious. It's more for inside the IDF, because I don't see any Haredi that will join the IDF because this thing that the chief of staff has actually signed on it. It took a long time till he signed on it. And you know something? Every newspaper, every Haredi newspaper, every single one from every party did not mention a word about it. Nobody talks about it. Seriously, nobody cares about it. The only one who care about it is commanders inside the IDF, and maybe some women organizations that they want to say, make sure that the female soldiers don't get offended and this and that. But seriously, nobody cares. It's not going to bring one soldier to the IDF. No rabbi is going to support the IDF more than he did till now because of it. It's like nice, it's good. Maybe the soldiers are happy, but really, politics, and I don't see any change.
But isn't this what leads to the frustration among much of Israeli society when the IDF is so in need of manpower after the fighting in the last 2 years, where even when, new directives come out trying to accommodate that lifestyle, but in the end of the day, a lot of the communities, the Haredi communities, are sort of inside their own bubble of the religious lifestyle, and they just say, you know what, we don't care whatever measures you're putting in, we're not going to be conscripted no matter what. What's going to happen sort of to the fabric of the Israeli society and potentially, outside politics, just when people see this and there's a need for soldiers, and it's not going to come from the ultra-Orthodox community, it seems.
Well, 2 weeks ago, I think, maybe 3 weeks ago, about 600 Haredi soldiers have joined the IDF. It was a big thing on the news, and also there was extreme people demonstrating against it. Yesterday, Wednesday, about 150 Haredi boys have joined the IDF. Not fighters, not go to Gaza, but some of them are married, some of them are like age 25, 26. But they joined the IDF to many places where the IDF need Haredim. So we can say that in the last month, 750 soldiers have joined. If we look at year 2021, 2022, do you know how many people joined the IDF from the Haredi communities? Maybe 1,200. So we had in 1 month 750. You know why? Because there is no law. No, there is sanctions. You've got to remember, every Haredi that does not join the IDF, does not show up after he got a letter from the IDF, he cannot fly, he cannot leave Israel. And you know, Orthodox people like flying, you can see it in the airport. He cannot, he doesn't get discounts, he cannot move, he can get arrested. So the people who are not really learning in the yeshiva, they're working, they go to university, they're afraid of being arrested and they want to fly. So they have no choice. So the way I look at it, there will be no law and the Haredim will be forced to join. The people who will join will be okay, and the people who will not join will have to live like 200 years ago without any human rights, because they choose to live that way.
Right. Well, that's sort of a situation that you have also with other populations in Israel, of people who don't really want to join, but what can you do? That's the law, and they join. But maybe from enforcing it, where people who are not going to the conscription, like you said, they're losing all those privileges. Maybe from that, people go in and it kind of becomes a norm, and then things can change, maybe. I don't know.
Yes, you're saying you're saying really, really good things. Well, I tell you what, the Haredi community is very afraid that the IDF wants to change someone's faith, someone's belief. And it's not true, of course. The IDF has much more important things now than to start changing people's opinions on people's faith. The IDF gives to the Haredi soldier every needs he wants. There's no problem in that. But as you said, the Haredi society are very afraid. Because, 2 years ago was different. But now, the Haredim need to be forced to get into the IDF. Once they will be inside, they will see that it's not so bad. And nobody is trying to change them, and the food is kosher, and there's no female soldier around them, and they have a synagogue, and they can pray, and they can study, and they can do whatever they want. They just need to, serve, and they can do it. We see that they can do it. So maybe after we force them, they will be happy to join without being forced. That's the way it's working now. And I think it's going to stay like that.
Yeah, I mean, we have to wait and see. Definitely when I speak to ultra-Orthodox people, they say really that it's very much an issue of lifestyle. People they're living a certain way, and they're scared that going into IDF is gonna basically destroy the thing that's most important to them, which is their faith and their studies. But maybe really with the enforcement and new directive, people can see that it is possible, and that could change things. Just a final question regarding the coalition and so forth. You were saying before, you think that despite this clash, there is going to be a compromise, at least for now, to enable the passing of the budget before we go to the elections at the end of the year, in which this is going to be a hot topic.
Yeah, well, I read today the Haredi newspapers. On the weekends, this is the best newspapers to get the real information. Everybody's talking about the budget. If there's no budget, nobody will vote for the Haredi community parties. Nobody will vote for in election. I mean, probably they will, but many people will not, because if there's no budget, no money to schools, no money to kindergartens, no money for nothing, and the Haredi people will go so crazy. The Haredi society needs the budget much more than the draft law, because they don't care about the IDF. They want money for the schools, and they will vote for it. That's the way it looks like now.
All right. Well, Yankee Farber, thank you very much for coming on and sharing those insights, and we're going to continue to follow this story very closely.
Bye-bye.
Now, finish with some heartwarming news. U.S. First Lady Melania Trump hosted former Hamas hostages Aviva and Keith Siegel at the White House, where the American-Israeli couple thanked the Trump administration for its role in securing their release from Gaza. Let's hear from Melania and the Siegels.
Aviva was a warrior. She's a warrior. She was fighting very hard for Keith, and I know he suffered a lot.
I want to thank you for being a caring, compassionate person, and for supporting and helping Aviva. During those difficult days.
You gave me so much hope and I could feel your heart with me. And I knew how important it was for you to go back home and talk to President Trump and share your feelings. So I want to thank you for that.
Yeah, we saw their former hostage, Keith Siegel, really tearing up in the presence of Melania because of the help that she gave, really, for the hostages in that situation. That's all we have for now. With these updates, you can scan the QR code on your screen to get our WhatsApp channel for all breaking stories, live updates, and reports delivered directly to you. We'll see you next time. Thanks for watching.
Welcome to ILTV Security Brief. I'm Khaled Ben David. Each week, we focus on the latest developments in security and defense relating to Israel and the Middle East, impacting on this region and beyond. And we start with our top items of the past week. U.S. Envoy Steve Witkoff, after meeting with Prime Minister Netanyahu in Jerusalem, is said to hold direct talks in Oman Friday with the Iranian Foreign Minister Abbas Araghchi over Tehran's nuclear program. President Trump says bad things will happen if no deal is reached, as Iran's Supreme Leader Ayatollah Khamenei threatens a regional war if the U.S. attacks. Amid a U.S. Navy buildup in the region, American warplanes shoot down an Iranian drone as it approached the carrier USS Abraham Lincoln, and the Fifth Fleet and Israeli Navy hold a joint exercise in the Red Sea. IDF Chief of Staff Eyal Zamir confers in Washington with top U.S. security officials to tighten military cooperation ahead of a possible conflict with the Tehran regime. The Rafah crossing between Gaza and Egypt is reopening for pedestrians as an initial step in Phase 2 of the U.S.-mediated peace plan. Israel says it is maintaining security control over the crossing despite it being operated by European officials, and it will only permit Palestinians who fled during the war to re-enter Gaza. An IDF reservist is seriously wounded after terrorists opened fire on Israeli soldiers near the Yellow Line border in northern Gaza. The IDF also identifies and eliminates 4 terrorists attempting to infiltrate into Israeli-held territory, but behind the Yellow Line. The IDF responds with airstrikes and artillery shelling, with Palestinian sources saying at least 9 were killed in the exchange of fire. The IDF continues to target Hezbollah terrorists and infrastructure operating in violation of the ceasefire agreement with the Lebanese government, including an airstrike eliminating Ali Dawood Amish, head of a Hezbollah engineering branch, attempting to rebuild military facilities and advance terror plots against Syria in South Lebanon's Al-Duwair region. And now, our big story. A U.S. deal with Iran or a military strike on Iran? Those are the options on the table as U.S. negotiator Steve Witkoff heads to Oman to meet with Iran's foreign minister in what seems to be a last-ditch effort by the Trump administration to strike a deal with the Tehran regime before taking military action against it. But what kind of deal would this be? One that would only address the nuclear issue, as Iran wants, or would also deal with the regime's ballistic missile program and support of terror proxies, as the U.S., Israel, and other nations in the region demand? And what about President Trump's pledge to help the Iranian people being gunned down in the streets? And if it comes to a strike, what are we talking about? And how much could it weaken the regime? Well, here's the latest from President Trump.
On Iran, are the negotiations still happening this week?
Yeah.
Where will they be? And what do you need to hear from Iran?
They're all over. But they are negotiating. They'd like to do something, and we'll see if something is going to be done. They had a chance to do something a while ago, and it didn't work out, and we did Midnight Hammer. I don't think they want that happening again, but they would like to negotiate. We are negotiating with them right now, yes.
And joining us for more now are Reserves Colonel Olivia Rafowitz. He's a security expert and the former senior IDF spokesperson. And also joining us is Mitra Jashny. She's a political and cultural expert and advisor at the Iranian Americans for Liberty organization. Thank you for joining us. Mitra, I want to start with you and just get your reaction and what the reaction is, for example, in the Iranian community about the decision by the U.S. to hold these negotiations with Iran.
Yeah, first, thank you very much for having me in your program. That is very, very important these days to be the real voice of Iranian people. And before I start with what happened with this negotiation, I would love to give you a brief about what's going on in Iran at the moment. We are living through history. What is happening in Iran is historical tragedy unfolding in real time. Many Iranians feel they are reliving one of the darkest chapters of their past. The images come out of Iran are among the most horrifying the world has seen in modern times. Families are searching through piles of bodies trying to find their loved ones. The regime is also committing systematic extortion against grieving families. Numerous credible reports indicate that the Islamic Republic is demanding payment for the bullets used to kill their children, amounts ranging from 1 of 10 billion tons. These families are under extreme economic pressure and are forced to accept a shameless condition to claim their child was a member of the Basij or the IRGC Guard and was killed by protesters. At the same time, state television repeatedly pushes the lie that protesters are agents of Israel and the United States. Just I want to say Iran is facing a deeply dangerous and inhumane situation, and unless the world stands firmly with the Iranian people, this crisis risks becoming an even greater humanitarian catastrophe. But I can say this very clearly and very briefly. I have received many messages directly from inside Iran, from families of those who were killed and from people close to them. They all say the same thing. They fear that if the United States negotiates with the Islamic Republic, the blood of their children will be wasted. They are not asking the world to reconcile with the regime. Even under extreme economic pressure, they are not asking for sanctions to be eased for the benefit of the Islamic Republic. What they want is the overthrow of the regime. They want to take their country back from a murderous system. For them, any form of compromise with the Islamic Republic means trampling on the blood of Iran's children.
All right. Well, Olivia, you heard strong feelings there among the Iranian community. Prime Minister Netanyahu also had a message to Steve Witkoff last night in Jerusalem. Don't trust the regime. Do you think that message is getting through to the U.S.? We know President Trump he says he'd prefer an agreement, but the military option perhaps remains open.
First of all, I want to convey my deep feeling for all the victims of this tragedy in Iran. In Israel, we are aware of this dictator who is killing tens of thousands of innocent people just because they want to be free. But let's get back to the issue between the USA and Iran. We see right now in the sea a tremendous Navy force capable to do something very important against the Iranian regime. But as you can understand, there is also the needs for the international community to say that first, let's try diplomacy in order to get full legitimacy. Because if there is a big strike, it can start by a strike, but it can also involve in something much bigger, much larger. So I think that we don't know yet what will be the issue with negotiation round in a few days. But we are aware that there is a real move by the American using force at least to deter and maybe to do something. When and how, it's still too soon to know about.
Right. Well, let me ask you, Mitra, if there is a strike, even a massive strike there, is that going to be enough to topple this regime? Will that to deter it from slaughtering Iranians in the streets? What would it really take to, for example, reignite the protests, the demonstrations, maybe convince others, maybe in the military perhaps, to finally turn against the regime?
Yeah. Let's tell you something clearly first. I would focus on the fact that anyone who is expecting other nations to free Iran is not serious about ending this regime. I would say that every free nation in the world has a moral duty to support the plight of Iranians to do away with this barbaric regime, and Iranians are deeply appreciative of this support, as evidenced by countless shows or bravely chanting on the streets, thanking President Trump and Prime Minister Netanyahu or other leaders at the risk of life. Ammunition, but neither the brave people protesting nor the real opposition outside of Iran expect the United States to topple this regime for them. I would also point out the obscenely equitable this regime has been in its repression. The new list of victims are from all walks of life, all geographic areas across Iran, from all ethnic background, speaking all Iranian dialect, as young as 3 and as old as 75, those who absurdly claims any division among Iranians based on ethnicity, faith, or geography. When it comes to sacrificing for Iran, there is only one kind of Iranian. Lastly, I would point out that after tens of thousands of civilian deaths, none of the free Palestine groups in the West showed an iota of solidarity with Iran. This is proof positive that these groups are just leftist extremists who hate the West more than anything else. But beside that, if I want to address exactly your question, it would certainly energize the populace to take to the street at the very least. Some speculate it may even embolden people to take over keynotes of power, such as national TV station or the parliament. This is what we believe, but we are not sure because we don't have any evidence yet. But we think Iranian wants some country really help them.
Right. Let me ask you, obviously the Israel, Olivier, wants the U.S. is leading. This effort will certainly lead into a military strike. But if it comes to that, you served in the IDF during previous conflicts with Iran. Is Israel ready and willing, if necessary, to, first of all, will have to defend itself against the Iranian onslaught we know will come, and to in some way join in the effort, if it reaches that, to really strike a decisive blow against Iran?
First, to answer you, I would say that first we send the red lines from the Israeli side to the American negotiation team. We have very clear red lines, and for us, Iran, of this regime, the Ayatollah and the Mullah regime, is a threat for Israel, an existential threat, and we will not accept in any case that Iran will continue to have nuclear weapons and ballistic missiles, and also the determination to wipe up Israel from the map. But saying so, we are ready for any development. Since 7th of October 2023, we have been surprised yet. We are not surprised anymore. And we said very clearly that in the case that Iran will make the big mistake to attack us or to do a wrong move, we will react in a way that never was done against Iran. And it was clearly said by our government to the Iranian leadership. But just one more to add. Iran is right now playing a game. Maybe they believe that they will continue to do what they want without any interference, without any involvement of anyone else. Because Donald Trump, the US president, is doing what he's doing right now, even if now we are entering maybe a negotiation period, nothing will be the same after, because what happened in January, around 40, maybe 50,000 people have been killed, is changing radically the whole situation.
All right, well, let's hope so. Mitra Jashny, of course, we share in your concern for the people of Iran, and thank you so much for joining us on ILTV Security Brief. Olivier, I'm going to ask you to stay with us. We're going to move to another issue. The second phase of the U.S.-mediated peace plan for Gaza finally took a concrete step forward with the reopening of the Rafah crossing into Egypt. Israel says it will maintain security control of the Sinai transit point, despite the fact it is being manned by European and Palestinian officials. But the next steps in phase 2 raise even bigger Israel concerns. Hamas claims it is ready to hand over administrative control of Gaza to the U.S. overseeing National Committee for the Administration of Gaza, which Israel has insisted should not be connected with the Palestinian Authority. But the official in charge of it is a former PA deputy minister, Ali Shat, and the NCAG revealed a new logo this week that includes the official PA logo, drawing immediate objection from Prime Minister Netanyahu. Of course, the major issue continues to be whether Hamas is ready to lay down its arms and agree to the full demilitarization of Gaza as the peace deal demands. And here we know, Olivier, there are some disagreements between the Trump administration and the Netanyahu government, the inclusion of Turkey and Qatar, perhaps some Palestinian officials. How firm do you believe Israel is going to be on making sure the rest of phase 2 does not proceed unless Hamas lays down its arms?
It is a non-issue. For us, it's a must, before anything else, that Hamas 35,000 terrorists with arms will be disarmed, Hamas will be dismantled, and the Gaza Strip will be demilitarized. If it is not the case, so we cannot move towards the step number 2. Maybe some arrangement can be done, but in the deep aspect of it, it's impossible to leave the Hamas alive there. And secondly, even if there's a kind of a so-called administration without Hamas dealing with the Gaza Strip, we know that Hamas still being there will infiltrate, will be part of it, maybe non-officially, but we know that they are already prepared themselves to infiltrate all this mechanism of administration with their own people, maybe with no Hamas fatigue clause, but there will be Hamas people, and it's totally unbearable.
Well, I just have an example. There are reports, for example, Turkey was trying to put forward a plan that would see, a figure was even put, 10,000 Hamas fighters be incorporated inside a new Palestinian police force. And is Israel in a position to prevent that kind of thing from happening, at least certainly on the Palestinian side of the yellow line?
Israel is in a position to send messages, but in the case that in 1, 2, 3 months, I don't know exactly the timing, nothing is done in order to disarm and to dismantle Hamas, there is a clear possibility, Kalev, that the IDF will get back to operations against Hamas, because I don't believe that someone else except the IDF is capable really to disarm and dismantle Hamas. I don't see any real force endangering their own people to fight Hamas and to disarm them, except if there is a kind of a game that so-called disarming will be at the end of the day non-disarming Hamas, but it will be like we disarm Hamas. And we see that.
I want to point out it has been proposed by some that, yes, that maybe Hamas would lay down its heavy weapons and keep sidearms, and that would allow some aspects of phase 2, the reconstruction, to get going.
We're Israeli, and we know what is Hamas. We know it for a long time, and we know it even more seriously since 7th of October. They are killers. They are rapists. They killed. They raped, they burned. It's totally impossible for us, and as an Israeli, but as the IDF, as a government, to accept any compromise, leaving Hamas still in place in the Gaza Strip with arms, with weapons, and part of anything connected to any governing force.
Right, and you mentioned Hamas, and then there is the other issue of the Palestinian Authority headed by Mahmoud Abbas, which is a rival of Hamas, but Israel has also said simply not reliable, not to be trusted. It may only seem a symbolic issue, this issue of this logo that was introduced, but perhaps a warning sign to Israel that certainly some parties involved in the Gaza peace plan, in the reconstruction, want to insert the Palestinian Authority into some kind of position there in Gaza.
Let's be frank. We cannot leave our security to someone else. It's impossible. Israel has to control the security issues for all the Gaza Strip. We cannot make that someone else will do it instead of Israel. It is our area of guarantee for security for all the country, from the south to the north. We saw what happened on the 7th of October. We saw the determination. We saw the willingness of the terrorists to kill, and the way that they did it. For us, it was a tragedy, but it's also a lesson that we learned on this terrible day. And since then, because of this lesson, we'll never, I will say never, let someone else be in charge of our security concerning Israel, State of Israel, from the north to the south.
All right, well, clearly Israel is going to have to press that point with the Trump administration and with the international community.
By the way, I think it's a good dialogue with our allies.
Right.
I think it's good to talk about it.
Right.
I think that if you're American, if you're European,
right,
you don't gamble with your security. It's impossible.
Right. Don't gamble with your security. Colonel Olivier Raffritz, thank you for joining us on ILTV Security Brief. And now a final word. Israel, the region, indeed the whole world, is now waiting to see if the U.S. will follow through on President Trump's warnings against Iran. Now, that will likely depend on the outcome of a short round of negotiations, testing whether the regime shows any willingness to limit its nuclear and ballistic missile programs and curtail its support of terror proxies such as Hezbollah, Palestinian Islamic Jihad, the Houthis, and Iraq's Shia militias. But even if it would make those unlikely concessions and reach a deal with the U.S., or if it fails to do so, triggering a U.S. military response, it's now clear that neither of these alternatives in the short term will bring down the repressive and corrupt rule of the Ayatollahs. The Tehran regime has clearly demonstrated that there is no limit to the level of brutality it will descend to in order to crush dissent and ensure its own survival, even if it means gunning down tens of thousands down in the streets and dragging the wounded out of hospital beds and into its prisons. The only strategy that could weaken this evil dictatorship must be a sustained campaign of economic and diplomatic isolation against its main organs and covert actions to cripple its means of oppression. A good start was made this past week by the European Union finally designating the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps as a terrorist organization and levying specific sanctions against 6 entities and 15 individuals associated with it. But it is fair to ask why this kind of measure was not taken sooner, and why some Western nations, most notably the United Kingdom, still have not done so. Clearly, there is much more that can and should be done. There must be a total ban on the import of Iranian crude oil, natural gas, and petrochemical products, along with secondary sanctions on such countries as China that continue to do so, and forcible internationally backed naval actions taken against the shadow fleet of oil tankers that enable this illicit trade. Iranian banks and financial institutions must also be banned completely from taking part in the global financial community, along with sanctions against individuals, both within and without Iran, that seek to undermine this effort, along with the freezing of those regimes' assets that are still being held abroad. Diplomatic ties with Iran should also be suspended and the regime's representatives ejected from international bodies. And there must be a concerted campaign led by the U.S. of covert actions in both the cyber and kinetic spheres, targeting those bodies like the IRGC and Basij resistant forces directly involved in the repression and butchery against Iranian dissenters. None of this is easy. None of this is short term. None of it may come without some cost in terms of economic and geopolitical stability for the West. But the longer the civilized international community puts off its day of reckoning with the barbarous regime, the more dire the consequences may ultimately be, as it continues to build up its conventional arsenal, add to that weaponry with a nuclear edge, and equip its terror proxies with these weapons. So whatever may develop over the next few days or even months with Iran, the ultimate goal must remain doing everything possible to undermine the rule of the Ayatollahs until the people of Iran finally have the strength, the will, and the confidence in the international community's backing to topple the tyranny that has oppressed them and terrorized the rest of the world for far too long. Thank you for joining us on ILTV's Security Brief.
For more than 200 years, when Israel's most vulnerable needed help, Kol El Chabad was there. When families can't afford food, when seniors are alone, when children are struggling to survive, Kol El Chabad steps in with meals, essentials, and dignity. Right now, thousands of families across Israel are counting on that help. And you can make sure it reaches them. Your donation doesn't just give charity, it gives hope, it gives strength, it saves lives. Kol El Chabad, helping Israel one life at a time. Scan the QR code on your screen and give now.
Imagine earning your master's degree on top of Mount Carmel, where forest meets sea and where every day brings a new cultural, academic, and personal adventure. This is the multi-experience at U Haifa International. Here, students from around the world live and learn together in Israel's most culturally diverse city, meeting new people, discovering new perspectives, and shaping their own Israel experience.
There's people from different countries, from different religions and different languages. Somehow we are all very similar.
At U Haifa, academics meet real life. You don't just study, you experience Israel up close, explore Haifa's mountain ocean city life, and build global friendships that last a lifetime.
It's not just a degree, it's an experience. It opens your mind, your network, and your world.
U Haifa International. Master your mind, live your Israel experience.
The story of the Jewish people has never been about standing still. It's a story of moving forward, of taking responsibility, of protecting what matters, no matter the challenge. That story is still being written today, not with swords, but with stewardship of the land, with the rule of law, and with the determination to secure Israel's future. And on the front lines of that mission stands Regavim. Regavim is a public movement dedicated to defending Israel's national lands and natural resources in the field, in the courts, and in the public square. Through research, on-the-ground action, and legal advocacy, Regavim works to uphold the rule of law and to ensure that Israel can grow, thrive, and remain rooted in its homeland. When you buy from Blessed by Israel, you're not just shopping, you're standing with the families of Israel's heartland. Every bottle of delicious olive oil, handcrafted necklace, or jar of honey carries the spirit of Judea and Samaria. These, along with many more products, are the tastes, scents, and stories of the Promised Land, made by people rebuilding our biblical homeland every day. Shop now at blessedbyisrael.com and use ILTV's special code BLESSISRAEL for 10% off on your first order.
Well, Israel is moving toward a landmark trade partnership with Somaliland after becoming the first country in the world to formally recognize its independence. Somaliland's president says a deal could include access to strategic mineral deposits, including lithium, in exchange for Israeli technology, marking a potent new alliance in Africa with significant economic and geopolitical implications.
So I can say regarding the trade and investment between Israel and Somaliland, the sky is the limit. The trade could be investment. It can be export. We have meat, we have fish, and they need it. We have minerals, they need it. So the trade can start from these main sectors.
Somaliland leader confirmed that he has discussed the placement of an IDF base in Somaliland with Israeli leaders, and he expects to visit Israel in the near future.
We're not discussing that subject, but in general, we want to build the capacity of our army and the police, so that can be a cooperation in the future. We hope to. The Prime Minister has invited me, and the Foreign Minister confirmed me the invitation. I accepted, so I expect to go there in Israel, and I expect also many other officials will come to Hargeisa.
Welcome back to ILTV on the Hour. I'm Alec Pollard, coming to you live from Israel with the biggest headlines from across the region. Talks between the U.S. and Iran are set to begin tomorrow in Muscat, Oman, following Iran's successful effort to shift the negotiations from Turkey to Oman and limit them to bilateral talks without other nations, focused only on the nuclear issue. This after Turkey brokered a clear framework for negotiations in Istanbul, including a broader regional track dealing with Iran's ballistic missiles, support for terror groups, and human rights abuses following recent protests inside Iran. President Trump said the U.S. remains open to talks, but has warned of grave consequences if Iran does not halt its nuclear weapons pursuit and regional proxies. Last night, Trump said Tehran's supreme leader Ali Khamenei should be very concerned, warning Iran against building new nuclear facilities, but stressed that negotiations are still underway. In a series of precise intelligence-driven strikes on Wednesday, the IDF eliminated 3 senior terror operatives from Hamas and Palestinian Islamic Jihad, all directly linked to the October 7th massacre and recent attacks on IDF forces. Muhammad Isam Hassan al-Habil was killed in a precise airstrike in Gaza City's Shati refugee camp in response to an attack on IDF forces in northern Gaza, in which a reserve officer was seriously wounded by Palestinian gunfire, a blatant violation of the ceasefire. According to Shin Bet interrogations, al-Habil was directly responsible for the murder of IDF captive Noa Malziano after she was abducted from the Nakhaloz outpost during the October 7th massacre. The IDF says the operation was made possible by extensive intelligence collection by the Gaza Division, the same division in which Noa Malziano served, describing the strike as a significant closing of the circle for her family, the army, and security forces. Other casualties were Ali al-Ghazaine, commander of Palestinian Islamic Jihad's Northern Gaza Brigade, who held hostages in Gaza, as well as Hamas Nukba Force commander Bilal Abuasi, who led the invasion of Kibbutz Nir Oz on October 7th. An IDF statement said these strikes send a clear message: any terrorist involved in the October 7th massacre and hostage-taking or in attacks on Israeli forces will be found and eliminated. The IDF released a drone footage Wednesday confirming what Israel has warned about for months: Hamas using civilian and medical cover to move weapons and fighters. Routine drone operations in the Jabalia area of northern Gaza captured Hamas gunmen using an ambulance to transport arms and operatives. The IDF says the transfers took place between a hospital and a school, both civilian sites. The footage shows armed men moving around the ambulance at 2 separate locations, clear visual proof of Hamas's systematic abuse of humanitarian infrastructure. The army says that since the ceasefire began, Hamas has continued to violate the agreement and focusing on rebuilding its military capabilities. U.S. First Lady Melania Trump hosted former Hamas hostages Aviva and Keith Siegel at the White House, where the American-Israeli couple thanked the Trump administration for its role in securing their release from Gaza. Let's hear from Melania and the Siegels.
Aviva was a warrior. She's a warrior. She was fighting very hard for Keith, and I know he suffered a lot.
I want to thank you for being a caring, compassionate person and for supporting and helping Aviva. During those difficult days,
You gave me so much hope, and I could feel your heart with me. And I knew how important it was for you to go back home and talk to President Trump and share your feelings. So I want to thank you for that.
And that's all for now, but before we go, we've got some exciting news. You can now get Israel updates on our WhatsApp channel. Breaking stories, live updates, and verified reports, all delivered fast and accurate directly to you. Just scan the QR code on your screen to join. And that's a wrap for this edition of ILTV on the Hour. I'm Alec Pollard, and thanks for watching.
Welcome to ILTV's Israel Daily. I'm Emily Schrader, and coming up in today's newscast, U.S. still pushing for talks with the Islamic Republic as the regime continues executions. Gaza ceasefire violated by Hamas after attacking IDF troops as fragile calm is broken. President of Somaliland to visit Israel after the Jewish state's historic recognition of the state. After 47 years, the Islamic regime in Iran appears to be crumbling. Or is it? What we saw in Iran was state savagery on a scale of barbarism matching the crimes of October 7th. The difference is that this time it was a government doing it to its own people. Roughly 40,000 Iranians were killed in a matter of days for protesting. That's the equivalent of filling MetLife Stadium in New Jersey and slaughtering every single person inside by their own government. Security forces shot protesters in the streets, they shot them in their cars, they shot them at checkpoints, and according to multiple eyewitness accounts, they even entered hospitals and shot wounded protesters in their beds to ensure that they didn't survive. Doctors and nurses who tried to save those lives were targeted next. Medical workers were arrested and interrogated for treating protesters. Some were detained, others threatened with prison. In Iran, even providing medical care becomes an act of defiance. In detention centers, the regime used sexual violence as a weapon. Women were raped during interrogations, including minors. Men were also sexually assaulted, according to reports. This was systematic abuse used to humiliate detainees and break them psychologically so they would never protest again. And of course, as we know, the regime committed these crimes under the cover of an internet blackout for more than 20 days. The goal was simple: stop the videos, stop the evidence, stop the world from seeing mass killings in real time. And while they slaughter, they speak against foreign intervention by the U.S., as if that's a bad thing when their own people are crying out for it in the streets. I remind you, the same regime that complains about foreign intervention brought in at least 5,000 Iraqi terrorists from its proxy forces to kill Iranians in Iran. Now, despite what President Trump has claimed, this regime has never stopped executing protesters. It has never stopped lying, and it has never shown any willingness to change, which is why the push to negotiate is moot. Negotiation is a delay tactic used by the regime to maintain power. There are moments when military action is not only warranted, but necessary, and this is one of them. President Trump told the Iranian people that help is on the way. Since then, roughly 40,000 of them were slaughtered, and now the United States is talking to their executioners. That does not look like help. It looks like abandonment. The regime has no legitimacy, no mandate, and no future. The only question left is whether the United States wants to hasten its fall, potentially saving the lives of tens of thousands, or be remembered as the one that kept it alive, betraying every Western value and abandoning the Iranian people. Well, the critical talks to avoid war between the U.S. and Iran have reportedly been moved from Turkey to Oman. Those deliberations could still take place on Friday, but President Trump is saying multiple meetings will take place. We have more from ILTV's Steve Leibowitz.
With a potential war looming, talks between the United States and Iran have been moved from Turkey to Oman after Tehran threatened to pull out. According to Axios, the Trump administration agreed to Iran's request to change the venue, with talks now expected to take place in Oman on Friday. Iran also sought changes to the format and scope of the negotiations. Iran is said to insist that the talks focus only on the nuclear file, while the United States wants to include Iran's ballistic missiles and regional proxy activity. Despite public threats by Iranian officials to withdraw, the White House says the talks are still on. U.S. Special Envoy Steve Witkoff and Jared Kushner and Iranian Foreign Minister Abbas Araghchi are expected to take part. U.S. President Donald Trump reportedly considered walking away from the talks with Iran after naval incidents in the Arabian Sea. The U.S. military shot down an Iranian Shahed 139 drone approaching the aircraft carrier USS Abraham Lincoln using an F-35 fighter jet. CENTCOM said the drone was destroyed in self-defense with no American casualties or damage. The U.S. officials say the incidents raised doubts about Tehran's intention. Here's the latest overnight comment on Iran from President Trump.
On Iran, are the negotiations still happening this week?
Yeah.
Where will they be? And what do you need to hear from Iran?
They're all over. But they are negotiating. They'd like to do something, and we'll see if something is going to be done. They had a chance to do something a while ago, and it didn't work out, and we did Midnight Hammer. I don't think they want that happening again, but they would like to negotiate. We are negotiating with them right now, yes.
Mr. President, where will the meeting be? It seems like it's changing.
I can't tell you that. There's more than one meeting.
Prime Minister Netanyahu met last night in Jerusalem with U.S. Special Envoy Steve Witkoff. According to the Prime Minister's office, Netanyahu warned that Iran has repeatedly proven it cannot be trusted to keep its commitments and stressed that any diplomatic process must prevent Tehran from obtaining nuclear weapons. Israeli and U.S. assessments remain highly skeptical about the chances of a deal.
Well, joining us now to discuss all the latest between the United States and the Islamic regime in Iran is Ron Campius, the former bureau chief at Jewish Telegraphic Agency. Ron, thank you so much for being with us today. Pleasure to have you on. Let's start with your take on the latest demands from the regime to move the talks from Turkey to Oman. What's your take on this?
It's just interesting that they're having talks. That I think Jared Kushner is the person who is representing the U.S. Talks take on a dynamic of their own. It's a sign that I think that the Trump administration is eager to avoid escalating the conflict and moving it from Turkey to Oman. From Iran's perspective, it keeps it more in the region. They've had despite the fact that Iran and Turkey and Qatar are the triumvirate of countries that backed Hamas, there is an ancient rivalry between Turkey and Iran. Turkey is seen as much, even now under Erdogan, as much more westward leaning. It's a member of NATO. So yeah, Iran would want it more in its neighborhood. It would want to remind the United States that the stakes are the stability of the Persian Gulf, where Oman is situated, and the trafficking of petroleum in that area.
Well, now, regime officials have repeatedly stated, even in recent days, that negotiations over their ballistic missile program are off the table. From the U.S. perspective, could a deal even be made without such an element?
Well, it has been made in the past, of course, with the Iran nuclear deal in 2015, where there were, I guess, off-the-record reassurances that Iran would limit its ballistic missile program, but nothing in writing. And so I think that would be very difficult for the Trump administration, for President Trump, who wants to show that he's capable of getting a better deal than any of his predecessors, and particularly President Obama. And so he would very much want some sort of limitations on ballistic missiles. So I'm not sure if that's bluster by the Iranians. I've read that behind the scenes that they're suggesting not necessarily shutting down the program, but providing assurances, actual proof that the missiles can't go beyond a certain distance. But otherwise, I think that would be a non-starter for the Trump administration.
Now, even if there is a deal, the reality is it probably won't change the fact, of course, in the past, that roughly 40,000 Iranians have been killed for protesting. I mean, what do you think that President Trump meant by his statements that help is on the way, and is what we're seeing now a betrayal of sorts?
I think those statements were never realistic. I don't understand. I never understood exactly how the United States was going to intervene in Iran. What the history of the Iranian Revolution is that Ayatollah Khomeini, when he was in France, plotting the overthrow of the Shah's government, didn't just want to replace it ideologically. He understood he was looking for weaknesses in how the Shah ran a dictatorship, and so he could amend those. And so he built, together with the founders of revolutionary Iran, this impenetrable structure that would be very hard. This is not Nicolas Maduro sitting in a stupid palace somewhere in Venezuela. This is a whole system. So I don't know what Trump meant when he said help was on the way. I think it's going to take a lot more of internal turmoil, a lot more of realizations coming from the defense and religious establishments in Iran before there's any change there.
Now, many people have speculated in recent weeks that the talks are a facade, that there's some sort of grander plan of President Trump. Indeed, there are many military assets that have been moved to the region. There are more on the way now. What are your thoughts on this? Is that a possibility?
Again, I don't doubt that President Trump might heed somebody who would say that military engagement is an idea. I think there's been talk, perhaps, of the United States going in and swiftly destroying Iran's, once and for all, destroying Iran's nuclear weaponization program. That would be a huge ask. That would be a big leap. Right now, it looks like posturing, but maybe there's something they have up their sleeve.
Now, I want to talk to you in the event that the regime does fall. I mean, what's that going to take? What would it require for an intervention, whether military or otherwise? Are the people capable of doing something like that on their own? What would the next steps be in this process?
I think that it's going to take a realization in the Iranian military establishment that this is no longer sustainable. And the brilliance, the evil brilliance, one might say, of the whole structure is that the theocracy has invested much of the military capabilities in the ideologically driven Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps, as opposed to the conventional military. So whether that can be penetrated, whether they can ever come to a realistic assessment that they have to cede power. You've got this incredible population in Iran that very bravely, very courageously, periodically rises up against the machine. And the machine, as we saw recently, always manages to shut it down. So it's hard to say exactly what would bring about the dismantling of the regime. And for an intervention, I don't think that that's going to be it.
Well, I want to ask you before I let you go about the IRGC designation that we just saw the European Union pass. What are your thoughts on this? What's the significance of the designation, and does it have the power to have any real impact?
The designation has the principal designation that really does have the impact is the American designation, because so much of the world, so much commerce in the world is dollar-based and continues to be dollar-based. So that's already severely limited the IRGC. I'm not sure exactly to what degree economically the European Union designation will further limit the IRGC, but it's a big symbolic win for the Americans and for people who have been, and for Israel, for people who have been advocating for IRGC's isolation, because it shows that they are perceived as no longer able to leverage the kind of threats that they once did.
All right. Well, we'll be sure to watch that and see what happens with the designation, as well as what happens inside Iran between the U.S. and the Islamic Republic. Thank you so much for joining us today, Ron Campius.
Thank you.
Imagine earning your master's degree on top of Mount Carmel, where forest meets sea and where every day brings a new cultural, academic, and personal adventure. This is the multi-experience at U Haifa International. Here, students from around the world live and learn together in Israel's most culturally diverse city, meeting new people, discovering new perspectives, and shaping their own Israel experience.
There's people from different countries, from different religions and different languages. Somehow we are all very similar.
At U Haifa Haifa, academics meet real life. You don't just study, you experience Israel up close, explore Haifa's mountain ocean city life, and build global friendships that last a lifetime.
It's not just a degree, it's an experience. It opens your mind, your network, and your world.
U Haifa International. Master your mind, live your Israel experience.
Overnight, IDF troops came under fire in North Gaza. A reservist was seriously wounded, and the IDF responded with airstrikes on multiple Hamas targets. The IDF reserve officer was wounded after Palestinian terror operatives opened fire on Israeli troops in the northern Gaza Strip. According to the IDF, soldiers from the Alexandroni Brigade came under fire from multiple gunmen while operating on the Israeli side of the Yellow Line, which separates areas controlled by Israel and Hamas. The IDF called the incident a blatant violation of the current ceasefire. In response, IDF tanks opened fire on the gunmen and airstrikes were carried out in the area. At least 9 reported dead in IDF strikes in Gaza, including 6 in the Strip's north, where the military says it returned fire against the gunmen. The reports say 3 people were killed in Israeli artillery shelling in Gaza City's eastern Tufa neighborhood. Another 3 people were killed by Israeli shelling in the Zaytun neighborhood of Gaza City. And in addition, 3 others are also reported killed in a strike in southern Gaza's Khan Yunis. And continuing with Gaza, many hoped the reopening of the Rafah crossing this week would signal a broader return to normalcy for Gaza. But Israel is making clear this is a limited step, with security remaining the top priority. ILTV's India Naftali has the details. India, what can you tell us?
Thank you, Emily. Medical patients are already beginning to pass through the Rafah crossing from Gaza into Egypt. However, the opening is highly restricted and limited to a small number of cases, which have all been vetted by Israel. Obviously, it's far from normal border traffic, but Israel says any expansion will depend entirely on whether security holds.
On 2nd February, WHO and partners supported the medical evacuation of 5 patients and 7 companions to Egypt via the Rafah crossing. It was the first medical evacuation through this route since sometime in 2025 after that ceasefire. WHO's role focused on ensuring the safe transfer of the patients from Gaza to the Rafah crossing.
The Rafah reopening is part of a U.S.-supported arrangement with Egypt and the European Union, with Israel responsible for security screening. The IDF released new video showing the new checkpoint at the crossing, including turnstiles, fencing, and security structures. Amid claims of tough security checks, the IDF says there have been no verified incidents of abuse or misconduct, stressing that the procedures in place are standard and focused solely on preventing terror activity. Israeli officials point to Hamas's past use of border crossings and humanitarian pathways to move operatives and weapons, making strict oversight unavoidable. This reopening is being framed as a careful first step, one that seeks to address humanitarian needs without compromising Israel's security. The World Health Organization says more than 18,000 patients in Gaza still require specialized medical care that is not currently available in the Strip. So while Rafah is open again, this is not a return to business as usual. Israel maintains that humanitarian measures can proceed as long as security conditions hold. Emily?
All right, thank you, India, for that update. Now, the IDF have revealed the new face of their Arabic language spokesperson. Muslim IDF Major Officer Ella Waweya, known as Captain Ella, will replace Colonel Avichai Adjei as the IDF's Arabic language spokesperson, taking charge of Arabic outreach across platforms. ILTV's Devo Klein has more.
ومن لما بدأ القتال ولحد ما ينتهي إحنا كلنا مع بعض عم بندافع عن وطننا وعن دولتنا وبنحميها. إحنا كلنا كإسرائيلية وبنعرف ليش عم نحارب.
This is Major Ella Waweya, known as Captain Ella. She will be the new face of the IDF's Arabic language messaging. The 37-year-old was born in Kalansawa, an Arab Muslim city located just west of Netanya. In 2013, Captain Ella decided to draft to the IDF, telling only her closest family members. From her service, she completed a high-ranking officer's course, graduating with praise and honors. Captain Ella quickly became known for her Hasbara-style videos on social media, gaining the attention of Arab speakers across the world, but especially the Middle East. Ella fills big shoes. She continues the path of Colonel Avichai Adrei, who spent 2 decades in the role of Arabic spokesperson, the most well-known Israeli face in the Arab world. But Captain Ella will pave her own route, using her passion for Israel and defending her homeland, standing proud as a Muslim Arab woman who lives in, fights for, and defends the state of Israel. Waweya will be promoted to lieutenant colonel upon starting her new role, making her the highest-ranking Muslim officer in the IDF. For more than 200 years, when Israel's most vulnerable needed help, Kol El Chabad was there. When families can't afford food, when seniors are alone, when children are struggling to survive, Kol El Chabad steps in with meals, essentials, and dignity. Right now, thousands of families across Israel are counting on that help. And you can make sure it reaches them. Your donation doesn't just give charity, it gives hope, it gives strength, it saves lives. Kol El Chabad, helping Israel one life at a time. Scan the QR code on your screen and give now.
Well, Israel is moving toward a landmark trade partnership with Somaliland after becoming the first country in the world to formally recognize its independence. Somaliland's president says a deal could include access to strategic mineral deposits, including lithium, in exchange for Israeli technology, marking a potent new alliance in Africa with significant economic and geopolitical implications.
So I can say regarding the trade and investment between Israel and Somaliland, the sky is the limit. The trade could be investment. It can be export. We have meat, we have fish, and they need it. We have minerals, they need it. So the trade can start from these main sectors.
Somaliland leader confirmed that he has discussed the placement of an IDF base in Somaliland with Israeli leaders, and he expects to visit Israel in the near future.
We're not discussing that subject, but in general, we want to build the capacity of our army and the police, so that can be a cooperation in the future. We hope to. The Prime Minister has invited me, and the Foreign Minister confirmed me the invitation. I accepted, so I expect to go there in Israel, and I expect also many other officials will come to Hargeisa.
Supermarket chains across Israel have begun limiting the purchase of milk and dairy products amid growing fears of shortages, following a strike by dairy farmers protesting government reforms. Hundreds of daily farmers protested today at the Knesset, arriving by tractor from all over the country. Industry sources say a combination of disrupted supply and panic buying is already affecting shelves. Rami Levy reported shortages in northern branches, while Machzanei Hashuk and Carrefour have imposed a 2-item limit on products including milk, cottage cheese, white cheese, and cream. Last week, several dairy production lines were shut down, leading to an estimated 20% drop in supply. The situation worsened when farmers blocked trucks from collecting milk at farms. Major dairy companies had expected stocks to last until Sunday, but increased demand and public stockpiling have forced retailers to act sooner. Supermarkets warned that more branches could run out of milk tonight. The strike targets Finance Minister Bezalel Smotrich's dairy reforms, which include opening the market to imports, cutting tariffs, lowering the price paid to farmers, and increasing competition from Europe. Farmers warn the reforms could harm small dairies and threaten economic stability of farms. Smotrich has warned that if supplies are halted, he will cancel all dairy tariffs to prevent shortages. And now let's take a look at the weather forecast. Clear skies are expected around most of the country tonight, with temperatures reaching lows of 9 degrees Celsius or 49 degrees Fahrenheit. Then tomorrow we'll see cloudy skies alongside steady temperatures, seeing highs of 20 degrees Celsius or 67 degrees Fahrenheit. That's a wrap for today's news. For the latest updates from Israel on all your devices, be sure to follow our ILTV channels and keep up with us on social media. That's ILTV_Israel on all platforms. Stay informed with the latest news straight from the heart of Israel. I'm Emily Schrader. Be well, and thank you for watching. Well, joining us now to discuss all the latest between the United States and the Islamic regime in Iran is Ron Campius, the former bureau chief at Jewish Telegraphic Agency. Ron, thank you so much for being with us today. Pleasure to have you on. Let's start with your take on the latest demands from the regime to move the talks from Turkey to Oman. What's your take on this?
It's just interesting that they're having talks. That I think Jared Kushner is the person who is representing the U.S. Talks take on a dynamic of their own. It's a sign that I think that the Trump administration is eager to avoid escalating the conflict and moving it from Turkey to Oman. From Iran's perspective, it keeps it more in the region. They've had despite the fact that Iran and Turkey and Qatar are the triumvirate of countries that backed Hamas, there is an ancient rivalry between Turkey and Iran. Turkey is seen as much, even now under Erdogan, as much more westward leaning. It's a member of NATO. So yeah, Iran would want it more in its neighborhood. It would want to remind the United States that the stakes are the stability of the Persian Gulf, where Oman is situated, and the trafficking of petroleum in that area.
Well, now, regime officials have repeatedly stated, even in recent days, that negotiations over their ballistic missile program are off the table. From the U.S. perspective, could a deal even be made without such an element?
Well, it has been made in the past, of course, with the Iran nuclear deal in 2015, where there were, I guess, off-the-record reassurances that Iran would limit its ballistic missile program, but nothing in writing. And so I think that would be very difficult for the Trump administration, for President Trump, who wants to show that he's capable of getting a better deal than any of his predecessors, and particularly President Obama. And so he would very much want some sort of limitations on ballistic missiles. So I'm not sure if that's bluster by the Iranians. I've read that behind the scenes that they're suggesting not necessarily shutting down the program, but providing assurances, actual proof that the missiles can't go beyond a certain distance. But otherwise, I think that would be a non-starter for the Trump administration.
Now, even if there is a deal, the reality is it probably won't change the fact, of course, in the past, that roughly 40,000 Iranians have been killed for protesting. I mean, what do you think that President Trump meant by his statements that help is on the way? And is what we're seeing now a betrayal of sorts?
I think those statements were never realistic. I don't understand. I never understood exactly how the United States was going to intervene in Iran. The history of the Iranian Revolution is that Ayatollah Khomeini, when he was in France, plotting the overthrow of the Shah's government, didn't just want to replace it ideologically. He understood he was looking for weaknesses in how the Shah ran a dictatorship, and so he could amend those. And so he built, together with the founders of revolutionary Iran, this impenetrable structure that would be very hard. This is not Nicolas Maduro sitting in a stupid palace somewhere in Venezuela. This is a whole system. So I don't know what Trump meant when he said help was on the way. I think it's going to take a lot more of internal turmoil, a lot more of realizations coming from the defense and religious establishments in Iran before there's any change there.
Now, many people have speculated in recent weeks that the talks are a facade, that there's some sort of grander plan of President Trump. Indeed, there are many military assets that have been moved to the region. There are more on the way now. What are your thoughts on this? Is that a possibility?
Again, I don't doubt that President Trump might heed somebody who would say that military engagement is an idea. I think there's been talk, perhaps, of the United States going in and swiftly destroying Iran's, once and for all, destroying Iran's nuclear weaponization program. That would be a huge ask. That would be a big leap. Right now, it looks like posturing, but maybe there's something they have up their sleeve.
Now, I want to talk to you in the event that the regime does fall. I mean, what's that going to take? What would it require foreign intervention, whether military or otherwise? Are the people capable of doing something like that on their own? What would the next steps be in this process?
I think that it's going to take a realization in the Iranian military establishment that this is no longer sustainable. And the brilliance, the evil brilliance, one might say, of the whole structure is that the theocracy has invested much of the military capabilities in the ideologically driven Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps, as opposed to the conventional military. So whether that can be penetrated, whether they can ever come to a realistic assessment that they have to cede power. You've got this incredible population in Iran that very bravely, very courageously, periodically rises up against the machine. And the machine, as we saw recently, always manages to shut it down. So it's hard to say exactly what would bring about the dismantling of the regime. And foreign intervention, I don't think that that's going to be it.
Well, I want to ask you before I let you go about the IRGC designation that we just saw the European Union pass. What are your thoughts on this? What's the significance of the designation, and does it have the power to have any real impact?
The designation has the principal designation that really does have the impact is the American designation, because so much of the world, so much commerce in the world is dollar-based and continues to be dollar-based. So that's already severely limited the IRGC. I'm not sure exactly to what degree economically the European Union designation will further limit the IRGC, but it's a big symbolic win for the Americans and for people who have been, and for Israel, for people who have been advocating for IRGC's isolation, because it shows that they are perceived as no longer able to leverage the kind of threats that they once did.
All right. Well, we'll be sure to watch that and see what happens with the designation, as well as what happens inside Iran between the U.S. and the Islamic Republic. Thank you so much for joining us today, Ron Campius.
Thank you.
And joining us now with the latest in Gaza is Lieutenant Colonel Advocate Maurice Hirsch from the Jerusalem Center for Security and Foreign Affairs. Thank you so much for joining us.
Hi, good afternoon. Thanks for having me.
So the Rafah crossing has officially opened. I mean, do you feel the security arrangements are adequate? Do you think the opening still poses a security threat to Israel?
So I think it very much depends on what the security precautions that are put in place at the crossing are. It depends on who exactly is going in, who is going out. I would suggest that to the government of the State of Israel that they open the Rafah crossing for everyone for everyone apart from the ages of men between 15 and 45. Anyone who wants to leave should be invited to leave. And then coming in, obviously, there should be much more inspection, closer inspection. We know at the moment that the crossing is only open for people to come in and out, not yet for goods and commodities. And that's something that has to be really monitored to make sure that there are no more incidents of the smuggling of weapons that we've seen so much in the past.
Exactly, and we have to remember that the Rafah crossing, which, as you mentioned, until October 7th was managed by Egypt, was essentially used as a smuggling route for weapons to Hamas. So how can Israel really ensure that this won't be the case again now that it's sort of handed over, at least partially, control to Egypt?
Well, so what we saw before the war was a situation where we had smuggling underground via the extensive tunnel network and then smuggling overground through the Rafah crossing. We had, let's call them actors on the Egyptian side who had a financial incentive in helping Hamas rearm, re-establish themselves, build their force, and then go to war with Israel. That's something which we have to prevent at all costs. Again, maintaining the presence in the Philadelphia corridor is quite a necessary security provision. I would say it's a critical security provision. And then monitoring everything that comes through the crossing, whether it comes through the crossing on one side, checked by the Egyptians, everything that comes in has to be checked on the Israeli side as well before it then moves on into the areas of the Gaza Strip, which are still, unfortunately, controlled by Hamas. And that's also something that needs to be dealt with.
Now, we've officially transitioned into phase 2, but Hamas, of course, has so far not made any progress to disarm. What can we expect on this front? I mean, what are the next steps now, especially with Turkey and Qatar in the picture?
I think we're coming into a very dangerous part of this deal. Hamas is not going to disarm, even though it committed to disarm. It gave that commitment as part of the plan that President Trump presented. And now really they're trying to challenge that commitment, to roll it back, saying that they never, ever agreed to disarm. And then we're seeing, just in the last few days, some of the very much more problematic involvement of Qatar and Turkey and even Nikolai Mladenov in this whole incident, where just over the weekend, where IDF forces were forced to deal with Hamas and Hamas terrorists, and the condemnations came out from Turkey, from Qatar, from Mladenov, all one-sided, all against Israel. These are people who are meant to ensure that Hamas meets their commitments and disarms, and yet they're going back to literally the 6th of October, protecting Hamas and attacking Israel.
Absolutely. When I heard Mladenov's comments, it really just sounded very, very similar to comments you would hear from the UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres. And an interesting development, though, that I do want to ask you about regarding the United Arab Emirates. They've now come forward saying that they might, take a larger part in post-war Gaza. Do you believe that their involvement increases the likelihood of success? And how does this, how would this change the bigger picture?
So I think the UAE has a critical part to play in the future of Gaza. What we've seen, obviously, the United Arab Emirates, part of the Abraham Accords, the fundamental change that we've seen just in their school curriculum over the last decade, possibly even a little bit more, their understanding of the Jewish presence in the area, the accepting of the Jewish presence in the area, and really basing it on the historical right of the Jewish people. So this is something which is critical. It's a critical stage in going forward, because really in Gaza you have, I would say, two different vectors that need to be dealt with. One is the intent. That's the ability of the terrorists to carry out the terrorist attacks and to carry on with their war. That's something which we have to deal with. We have to disarm them. We have to take away their weapons. But when we're talking about motivations, this is already a different story. And here we need to get into the whole issue of de-radicalizing, denazifying, and even to be more accurate, the Gaza Strip, changing the way that the next generations are educated. If we finish and we disarm Hamas, but we allow the PA school system, the Hamas curriculum to keep on being taught in the schools, then we'll see more and more generations of hatred and of violence and of terrorism. If we can change that fundamental at its roots and change the education program in the Gaza Strip, obviously we don't need to make it necessarily Zionistic. We just need to teach the Gazans that it's not okay to murder Jews.
A lot of work yet to be done. Lieutenant Colonel Advocate Maurice Hirsch, thank you so much for joining us today and for your insights.
Thank you very much for having me.
Now, with U.S. warships moving toward Iran and President Trump openly warning of military action, but also making a reference to a possible deal, questions are growing over whether diplomacy still has a chance. Joining us now to break this down is Dr. Mordechai Kedar, Middle East expert from Bar-Ilan University. Thank you for joining.
Pleasure.
So President Trump publicly commented about giving Iran a deadline to strike a deal, while also moving a large armada of U.S. warships toward the region. What kind of deal are we talking about here? Is it only about nuclear enrichment, or are there other elements on the table? What do you think?
Well, history shows that the Iranians are abiding to demands which come upon them from other countries only when they feel a credible threat. Only then they succumb to the demands of countries like the United States of America. And apparently what Trump is building here is a credible threat. Means a threat if you, the guys, means the Iranians, if you don't do what I tell you to do, you will suffer tremendously. And he is preparing this suffering. So there is a chance that they will succumb, they will give up on the nuclear program, or at least they will agree to freeze it. They might even free political prisoners, means those kids who were caught and arrested during the riots like in the last month. And definitely they will try to buy time in order to bring Trump to the midterm elections in November, when he cannot start a war because he will lose the majority in the Congress or in the Senate as well. So this is what they will try, as always, to buy time and to gain whatever they need by buying time.
Now, would you say Israel and the United States are aligned on Iran? Meaning, is there a deal that would be acceptable to the U.S. but not to Israel?
Of course. If the United States comes to a deal with the Iranian regime, and the Iranian regime remains as the ruling elite of Iran, this is something which Israel might not tolerate, because the problem is not only their missile program and the nuclear program. The problem is the regime, because this regime will always try to get nuclear weapons. This regime will always try to renew its arsenal of missiles. And if it will not be in the Trump's time, it will be in his successor time. And they have patience. In the Quran, there is a verse which says that Allah is with those who have patience. And they have a lot of patience, those Shia. They waited to the returning of the Shia to the government more than 1,000 years, since the 7th century. So, yes, their terms of time are totally different from the Western culture. They can wait for 20 years, 100 years. It's okay, they can wait. They ain't going anywhere. And this is their mindset, which the world unfortunately doesn't understand. They have to be kicked out totally. they have to be chased out until the end of the mullahs from Iran. Maybe bring back Reza Shah from the United States or somebody else. Dismantle Iran to ethnic states like a Kurdish state and Azerbaijani state. Maybe they will join Azerbaijan, which once was under the Soviet Union. Turkmenistan or Turkmen state, Baluchi state, and the Arab state in the Ahwaz. And these are the ethnicities which Iran is comprised of. And this is the only solution which will bring some peace to these regions of Iran.
Now, how do you assess Iran's internal stability right now, following all the protests and the extremely aggressive crackdown and the killings?
Well, as long as the regime is there, they will continue to butcher their people because they don't care about anyone in the people, especially those who are running in the streets demanding the removal of the regime. So if the world tolerates it, let the world bear consequences, because if they don't care about their own citizens, they don't care about anybody else. Because why should they care for others if they don't care for their own citizens? They might, in order to convince Britain to do all kinds of things, they might threaten Britain that they will send some missiles towards London. And what will London do? And they might threat France and other countries as well. And missiles are not, and missiles and nuclear weapons are not only the problem of Israel.
Dr. Mordechai Kedar, thank you very much.
A pleasure.
Executive Director of the American Zionist Movement.
What can you tell me about this movement?
So AZM, the American Zionist Movement, is the Zionist Federation in the United States. It's an umbrella body that convenes 51 national Jewish Zionist organizations.
Wow.
From right to left, youth movements, groups that are very political, groups that are apolitical, women's organizations, groups that represent the different religious streams. We are the Zionist Federation in the United States that is part of the World Zionist Organization. Last year we organized the U.S. election for the Zionist Congress, and we arranged all the Americans who participate in the World Zionist Congress, and through that in the system of the Mosdot HaLeumim, the national institutions.
Wow. How did it all started?
When did we start?
Yeah.
So the organization's been around in different names since for over 80 years.
80 years.
With the same mission to bring together the different organizations in America that represent diverse views of the Zionist movement. So there, it began with the labor Zionists and the religious Zionists and Hadassah and the ZOA, and it's grown to now there's 51 different organizations. There's many ways to be a Zionist, from the right to the left, religious spectrum, and the groups in AZM show the diversity of the Zionist movement. You can be a Zionist in many different ways, still love Israel, still
What do
believe
you
in
mean,
Zionism.
so many ways?
Meaning you can be a right-wing Zionist, you can be someone who's a left-wing Zionist, you can, believe in Zionism from different angles of the religious perspectives, from the Orthodox, the Haredi group, Reform movement, conservative movement. You can be someone who's in favor of one state, two states. There's many.
You can be everything you want as long as you're a Zionist.
As long as you're a Zionist, correct. And there's many different ways that people express their Zionism. Some express it religiously, some politically, some with their advocacy, some with their social services. There are Zionist groups that work in education, in supporting children and families. There's many different ways that one can express their Zionism. But the bottom line is, if you're in the American Zionist movement, you are a Zionist. There are parts of the Jewish community that are not Zionist, sadly. They're anti-Zionist, and obviously they wouldn't join a Zionist organization.
How can you join?
So the organizations either apply to be part of the Zionist movement, or most of them run in the election for the Zionist Congress, which is actually brings me to, if you're going to ask me why I'm here at the IAC.
Why are you here?
Because there's many people here who have participated from different parties in the AZM, in the Zionist election. One of the things we've also seen in the last couple of years, the IAC and several other groups that represent Israeli Americans have joined the Zionist movement in America. And the Israeli Americans are a strong part of the American Jewish community that for many years sort of operated separately. They kept to themselves. They didn't participate with the bigger, broader Jewish community at large. And in the last couple of years, even starting before October 7th, but even accelerated after October 7th, the community has seen that it really wants to be part of the American Jewish ecosystem, and doing things like participating in the Zionist Congress and the Zionist movement is a way for the Israeli American Council, other organizations of Israeli Americans, to be part of the Zionist and Jewish community as a whole. So we're here to support them in their efforts and to encourage more people to be part of the structure and the organization of Zionism in America.
Amazing. I want to take you back 2 years to October 7th. Where were you? Where was the organization?
I mean, that morning, I woke up, saw a flash on my phone when my alarm went off before going to Beit Knesset. Didn't know really what was going on. Got to the synagogue and started hearing all the stories. My first thought was my son, who was an Oleh, who had been in Chayal Boded, and he was in university, and was he going to get called up to service? Obviously was hearing and very concerned about all the horrific news we kept on finding out, and then of course he was called up.
Wow.
So I had a personal connection because as the parent of a lone soldier, and many relatives all over Israel, and so the personal connections between everybody here in the United States and Israel was totally intertwined. You couldn't really separate that. The organization really was in a point where American Zionists were fractured. A month before, there were protests when Bibi was the prime minister was at the UN, and there were protests about the judicial reform and in favor of the prime minister and against the prime minister, and there were demonstrations on the streets, and the story was how divided the American Jewish community was. We actually changed our slogan to Zionism Together, that we want Zionists to work together and find the things that they could be unified on. And we had changed the slogan over the summer of 2023. And then after October 7th, the Israeli slogan became B'yachad Nenatzach, which is which then showed us that we all need to work together. We can have differences. We can disagree on one state. What do you call the area over the Green Line? Is it Judea and Samaria, the West Bank? Where do you pray at the Kotel, and many other issues? And you can put all those things aside because we have bigger issues to deal with as a Jewish people together, such as the survival of the state, such as the attacks on Zionism in Israel. So it was a fundamental moment for not just the Jewish people in the United States and Israel, but for the Zionist movement also.
What kind of reactions did you get after October 7th?
I guess there were, at the beginning there was widespread support for Israel and sympathy, for the horrific attacks that happened, and generally, for the Jewish community, remained solid and obviously very committed to fighting for the hostages. In the broader community, as everyone knows, the further you got away from October 7th, support waned, and people started to, question, what was Israel doing? Are they going too far in response and in prosecuting the war and getting rid of Hamas? And the story shifted from the atrocities of Hamas to the conduct of Israel in the war. And unfortunately, the things that were done that precipitated the war, the horrors committed by Hamas and the acts of terror that they did, started to lose attention as people got away further from it in the public eye.
After October 7, more organizations and more people joined the movement?
Yes.
Okay.
Which was, I don't know how much you followed or your viewers followed the U.S. election for the Zionist Congress, and I did an interview with Mayan last year, so about it, and 5 years before, it was 125,000 people signed up. Last year, double the number.
Wow.
And so what that showed was that people wanted to be engaged. They wanted to do something. I mean, this was a small thing to say, I am a Zionist, I'm voting in an election, I want my voice to be heard. And they weren't afraid, to run away from the word Zionism, and they wanted to be more committed. And there were 8 new parties that ran. Many of them were motivated to, I got to do something, and I have a segment of the Jewish community in America that wants to be involved, and I can reach that segment of the community through the Zionist election. So more people got engaged. So, there's no silver lining to what happened October 7th. It was horrific. We wish it never happened.
Yeah.
But as a result, there were people that got engaged and motivated to be involved.
Do you feel a rise in anti-Semitism towards the movement?
I think that people became, there was sometimes a debate before, is anti-Zionism a form of anti-Semitism or not? I think everyone really realized after October 7th, with a rise, especially in anti-Zionism or anti-Semitism manifested through anti-Zionism, that is very much the case. And, sadly, sometimes the negative motivates people to be involved, and that got people more involved, or people felt they had to speak out or go to synagogue or go to a Jewish organization or something like that.
Thank you so much for this interview. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you for the opportunity.
Israel's only English news channel, bringing you the headlines that matter every hour, straight from the center of where it's all unfolding.
Welcome back to ILTV on the Hour. I'm Alec Pollard, coming to you live from Israel with the biggest headlines from across the region. Talks between the United States and Iran are set to begin tomorrow in Muscat, Oman, following Iran's successful effort to shift the location from Turkey and have bilateral negotiations only, without other nations, focused solely on the nuclear issue. This after Turkey brokered a clear framework for talks in Istanbul, including a broader regional track dealing with Iran's ballistic missiles, support for terror groups, and human rights abuses following recent protests inside Iran. President Trump said the U.S. remains open to talks, but has warned of grave consequences if Iran does not halt its nuclear weapons pursuits and regional proxies. Last night, Trump said Tehran's supreme leader Ali Khamenei should be very concerned, warning Iran against building new nuclear facilities, but stressed that negotiations are still underway. UN High Commissioner for Human Rights, Volker Turk, issued a warning today, saying his organization is in survival mode due to a funding crisis. Turk is appealing to the international community for $400 million in voluntary funding to keep all arms of the UN Human Rights Division functioning. But it's not just the Human Rights Office. Secretary General Antonio Guterres said last week that the entire UN is facing imminent financial collapse. This is part of a continual decline of trust in UN institutions, which countries like the US are no longer willing to foot the bill for. President Trump not only significantly cut funds to the UN, but also bypassed it with his new Board of Peace for Gaza, which most Israelis would consider preferable to the UN, considering its track record of obsessively singling out Israel for condemnation. Now, the IDF released drone footage Wednesday, confirming what Israel has warned about for months: Hamas using civilian and medical cover to move weapons and fighters. Routine drone operations in the Jabalia area of northern Gaza captured Hamas gunmen using an ambulance to transport arms and operatives. The IDF says the transfers took place between a hospital and a school, both civilian sites. The footage shows armed men moving around the ambulance at 2 separate locations, clear visual proof of Hamas's systematic abuse of humanitarian infrastructure. The army says that since the ceasefire began, Hamas has continued to violate the agreement and focus on rebuilding its military capabilities. Now, U.S. First Lady Melania Trump hosted former Hamas hostages Aviva and Keith Siegel at the White House, where the American-Israeli couple thanked the Trump administration for its role in securing their release. Let's hear from Melania and the Seagulls.
Aviva was a warrior. She's a warrior. She was fighting very hard for Keith, and I know he suffered a lot.
I want to thank you for being a caring, compassionate person and for supporting and helping Aviva. During those difficult days.
You gave me so much hope, and I could feel your heart with me. And I knew how important it was for you to go back home and talk to President Trump and share your feelings. So I want to thank you for that.
And a reminder of our main story, the negotiations between the United States and Iran. We're going to continue to follow all the latest updates as those talks begin tomorrow in Muscat, Oman, in the Persian Gulf. And before we go now, we've got some exciting news. You can now get Israel updates on our WhatsApp channel. Breaking stories, live updates, and verified reports, all delivered fast and accurate directly to your phone. Just scan the QR code on your screen to join. And that will be a wrap for this edition of ILTV on the Hour, broadcasting live from Israel and the heart of the Middle East. I'm Alec Pollard. Thanks for watching, and we will see you next time.
Good evening and welcome to Insider. I'm Mayan Hoffman, executive editor of ILTV, and tonight I decided to shake things up. I brought with me a co-host, someone you're quite familiar with, Dan Perry, a veteran foreign correspondent who has reported from 4 continents and served as chief editor of the Associated Press for Europe, Africa, and the Middle East. Dan has spent decades challenging power, narratives, and assumptions. He writes Ask Questions Later on Substack and contributes to Newsweek, The Hill, Haaretz, and more. Welcome.
Thank you, Maya.
Yeah,
Thank you for inviting me. This should be fun.
Should be fun. Glad you're here with me. Now, tonight, we're going to start with Iran. If Israel is attacked, what should it do, especially as President Trump signals he wants a deal more than a war? While Israel appears to be thinking strategically about something a little bit bigger. Then, if we have time, we're going to turn to Gaza, ceasefires, escalations, and responsibility. To break this all up and to break it all down, I should say, we have with us 2 senior journalists and analysts, Gidon Levy of Haaretz and Ruthie Bloom of JNS. Let's get started. So I'm going to ask the first question, and it's going to be this. Right now, today, Witkoff is in the country meeting with Netanyahu, with the chief of staff, with the head of the Mossad. And Ruthie, what is it that Israel should be asking for?
I don't know about asking for. I think that Israel should be clarifying something to Steve Witkoff. He's problematic on two counts. One is that he's got financial interests in Qatar. The other is that he is also under the delusional thinking that that deals are better than, that you can make a deal with Islamist, jihadist, with a regime that's the greatest state sponsor of global terrorism. He thinks that a deal is possible. And I think that Netanyahu and the head of the Mossad and the head of the army need to set him straight. That was that kind of thinking that also led to the October 7th massacre.
Respond.
Obviously, I think exactly the opposite. The Ruti, surprise, surprise. I think that we are in a stage in which it's about time that Israel will realize that wars are not the answer for every problem. And in many cases, wars solve nothing. And the only way really to solve things goes through diplomacy, I'm not a pacifist. I don't think that wars are always unnecessary. But at this point, after 2 years in Gaza in which Israel achieved nothing, really nothing, today's Israel position is much worse than 2 years ago. To go now to push the United States and ourselves into another war with Iran, and then what? And then what? We'll get back to the negotiation table after so many losses. So let's give it a chance now.
Let me sharpen this though a little bit. There are situations in history where foreign intervention is justifiable. When the country is sufficiently oppressive to its own people, it could be justified. But most certainly, when a regime interferes with its neighbors and causes tremendous damage to an entire region, the way the Islamic Republic has done in this case, it seems to me that there's a reasonable argument for foreign intervention and even for an attempted assist to a regime change, to inspire local opposition to, together with the foreign assist, take things over and bring about a better future for the Iranians, but the region. Would you really dispute that that would be a reasonable thing to shoot for?
I couldn't agree more with you, Dan. The only problem is that it's not achievable.
Regime changes have happened.
Not through wars and not through a quite based regime like the Iranian one. You can bomb and bomb and bomb, and maybe you unite the Iranian people around the leadership. The leadership might fall, but it will fall from within. Bombardment will not bring you to this. If I thought that a war will change the regime in Iran, I would be in favor of.
But let's go back to the 12-day war, and we know that a lot of the reason that we see the protests today, and Ruthie, I'm going to have you respond to this, is because they felt empowered against their government, because they saw a weakened government after Israel and the United States attacked Iran and destroyed most of their nuclear facilities. Ruthie.
Oh, absolutely. I'll tell you, Gidon, I do agree with you about one thing. It is true that the great Middle East expert, the late Bernard Lewis, said, I don't know, about 20 years ago, if I remember correctly, he said, you know, the trouble with bombing Iran's nuclear facilities is that it's likely to unite the Iranian people around the regime. At the time, I thought, well, if so, then screw them. Okay, I thought, I'm sorry, we have to worry about our own security. Today, it's different. I think the Iranian people are not going to rally around the regime no matter what. First of all, they were less afraid because they saw that Iran was more of a paper tiger than I think the whole world thought, and certainly Israel. You know, all of those years we were saying, we can't poke the bear because then we'll be wiped out and we'll be nuked and everything. And then we saw in the 12-day war that it was not at all as bad as we thought. It was bad. We had damage done from their missiles.
We also lost 28 people, I think.
We did, but yes.
But it could also be worse next time. You could argue that there was an element of luck, great skill, but also
No,
luck.
for sure, although we did damage a lot of their facilities. The issue, though, now is we're seeing the Iranian people in the streets, and here's the reason that I think that both President Trump and Prime Minister Netanyahu have a great responsibility to the Iranian people, because both of them encouraged them to keep going, and they were being gunned down in the streets. It's not true that executions ceased, as President Trump seems to think, delusionally. What we know is that they were encouraged and emboldened not only by their own predicament, and they're hungry, they have no, water, everything is going bad, their currency is worth nothing, and they're being gunned down. But President Trump and Prime Minister Netanyahu emboldened them by saying, you know what? It's okay. We're on the way. Help is on the way, and we're behind you. To abandon them at this stage would be immoral and terrible.
Ruthie, let's consider an alternative scenario, because there are many ways in which this could go. And Gideon is obviously correct that a foreign intervention generally doesn't work particularly well, and history suggests it could end up working very badly indeed. If it turns out that the regime in Iran knows that they are as brittle as we believe them to be, and that they're detested by the people to the degree that we believe them to be, they might be more acquiescent. If it were possible, and I do not trust Trump to push as far as I'd like him to push, but if it were possible to get them to not only forswear nuclear enrichment, but also give up the ballistic missile program and their regional jihadist expansion project via the militias, theoretically, if that were possible, would you not agree that it might be worth pursuing? In other words, all this pressure and the internal dissatisfaction might have created a more conciliatory reality on a part of the regime. If it were true, wouldn't you go for that?
Well, I would go for it if it were true in some fantasy land, but in reality, everything you described would mean that they're no longer jihadist, radical Islamists. They're no longer with hegemonic.
Still want to oppress the people, still want to kill the gays.
No, but the point is not that. The point is that I wouldn't go for that because if the regime knows it's brittle, one of the things we need to start seeing are defections on the part of the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps and also members of the regime. What we have seen is that some of them are moving their money out, which is also a sign that they themselves are nervous. This isn't the time then to say, okay, you're nervous, so now we're going to capitulate. The opposite has to happen. But there's no way any deal they make, you can't trust that. You say you don't trust President Trump to go as far as he should. I don't trust the regime in Iran to uphold any, even if it makes an agreement, it won't stick to it.
Now, Gidon, what do you think? I mean, because the reality is that if the regime gets sensitive enough, maybe a strike is actually what it needs to be able to topple it. You know, you think about this threat that the Iranian regime is making, that they're going to attack Israel if the U.S. attacks Iran. But if Iran would attack Israel, they know they have no air defenses. They know that Israel will demolish the Iranian regime. So wouldn't that actually be a stronger move if you actually want to see the regime fall?
No, because Israel cannot demolish the regime. Nobody can demolish from the outside. We are dealing with hundreds of thousands and millions who are part of this regime. It's not a one-man show there. The Revolutionary Guards are tens of thousands of people. The whole establishment is a very strong and well-rooted establishment. You don't uproot it by bombing. It doesn't work.
So what would you do if Israel were attacked? And I put this question to both of you. Let's suppose that the Iranians act unwisely, in my assessment, take this risk of provoking Israel that has more airplanes here than the Americans do in this region, and gives Israel the excuse to act. Should Israel act?
First of all, I think you underestimate them. They are much more clever than this. They wouldn't do it, because they know the consequences.
No, I agree with that.
So until now, they are quite rational. I mean, we tend always to portray them as crazy people. They are quite, according to their rationale, they are quite rational. It's a quite rational leadership. And I think, obviously, if they attack us, we have no other choice but to retaliate.
But just to reiterate, you actually assume, and I'm actually inclined to agree with this, that if the U.S. attacks Iran, Iran will not attack Israel.
No, this I'm not sure. This I didn't say.
But I think we have an assessment that they may not, that it may be a bluff.
I doubt it. I doubt it. I doubt it, and we better take them seriously. I doubt it, and therefore that's another reason for me to do anything possible before any attack, because the prices can be very heavy. Israel is, after 2 years of war, really exhausted mentally, morally, socially, and financially. And there is no energy now for another war.
So, Ruthie, if Iran does attack Israel, what do you do?
Okay, so first of all, I actually agree with Gidon that Iran is
not the show.
No, we can't do this. Wait, I'll tell you where I totally disagree.
Wrong. I guess I'm wrong.
You must be wrong. I agree that they're not that stupid and they're not going to attack Israel first without being provoked, so to speak.
After the U.S. attacks them, they attack Israel.
That for sure. They said they do it, and I believe they will.
Exactly.
But I think, and here's where I disagree with you. When you said, so we should do something first, and you think that is diplomacy, and I think we need to preempt militarily. That's where you and I disagree. And the reason is that if we have two choices here, and I think that's the trouble with the Israel right now that Netanyahu is weighing, and that is, at what moment does he stop waiting for Trump to take the initiative? And we don't know what's going on behind the scenes, so who knows? Maybe they're already coordinating. We don't actually know. We don't know when or if it's happening. But my feeling is Israel cannot sit around and wait for that to happen. And I don't like it every time Netanyahu says, to Iran, if you attack us, you'll be sorry. No, sorry. Enough with the if you attack us. If that's what you think, attack first, okay? Enough with the October 7th. Enough with being sitting ducks for enemies who swear to wipe us off the map.
Let's just be very clear. Israel cannot do anything without the approval of the United States.
Correct. That I know.
Let's not play,
You're right. You're right.
I just want
you're right,
Israel
but
get
so
the
far...
approval of the U.S. to attack in Qatar? I kind of thought they did, but we seem to be in a bit of a cloud of confusion.
Yeah, but this was a very local and isolated incident.
Yeah.
Moving to that issue, let's just move to Gaza for just a second.
Right, well, certainly we've seen a lot of escalation going on in Gaza.
I wish we could move to Gaza as journalists. Israel is preventing us
well,
of
tell
this.
the Supreme Court.
I wish you would move to Gaza and live there for a while.
Thank you. I wish I could visit there.
The current escalation in Gaza, who's to blame? Who's trying to restart the war, or is it a terrible misunderstanding?
It's not a question. I really. Where is the question?
Is Hamas provoking Israel?
540 people Israel killed in the ceasefire. 540 people.
So
Out
Israel's
of them,
trying to restart the war.
What does this has to do with ceasefire? How can you call it a ceasefire? 500, over 500. Israel continued to destroy and demolish houses and all kinds of buildings. What kind of...
So let me answer the question, although I'm...
I'd actually love to hear Ruthie's response to this.
Well, his answer seems to be that Israel never really genuinely agreed to a ceasefire.
More than this.
Not that Hamas is provoking Israel and doing violations.
And you hear it in the army. Israel, or the government of Israel, does not want Chapter B to be implemented. Israel is very clear about it. They have no other choice but to go through the motions, but they'll do anything possible to sabotage the second stage, anything possible to get back to the fighting table, anything back to settle Jews in Gaza. That's the real plan of this government. They never gave it up, including transferring the occupation.
Okay, so first of all, ceasefire. Now, that's a big joke on the part of Hamas. Anybody killed in Gaza is the fault of Hamas and the other terrorist groups. It is true that since the ceasefire, Israel has had to keep fighting because terrorists keep coming out, attacking soldiers, or on the way to attacking soldiers. They go up to the yellow line. There are still tunnels. Today, weapons were found in UNRWA sacks, etc. It's still going on. There are still tunnels. And this period of time, the one lucky thing about it is that the United States is not condemning Israel from doing this repeatedly, the same thing in Lebanon with the Hezbollah, which is to say that every time we see terrorist activity, we go after it. But one thing I just would like to say about it, Israel is right to be hesitant about this Plan B in Gaza. It's not that Israel is dying to go back to war. It is that plan is delusional because it is based, again, on this false idea that all you need to do to prevent jihad and terrorism is give people work and affluence and a better life. We've seen again and again what a big, fat lie that is.
So there's a technocratic government. There's going to be an international stabilization force. There's a board of peace. A whole edifice has been created to attempt to give the Palestinians some version of hope and some reason to not support Hamas. You believe all that is pointless? What would be your better version of a Phase B?
Kill them all.
You know, that's what you get from what I said is kill them all, really?
Yes.
Listen, I got to tell you something. Where killing is concerned, if you want to know, if it were just up to me to think about all the people I dislike and would like to kill, it would probably be, you know, most of the world. But I'm not into killing people. What I am is into looking at something realistically, and I don't think that the Palestinian mind frame is going to change until the education system is changed, until the Palestinian Authority stops funding terrorism and encouraging it. And
but all that is in Phase B.
That's all in Phase B. Okay, but we have to see it happening. But the idea
and we
of
also
it,
have to see potentially disarmament happen beforehand. I mean, I think one of the questions that we need to talk about, you mentioned the International Stabilization Force, and there are many who believe while there is a commander, there are no soldiers to work under this commander at this stage. And who is going to fill that stabilization force? Certainly it doesn't appear to be people who want to ensure that Hamas is disarmed and not carrying out terrorist attacks. Gidon, I mean, what is your vision if this would move forward to stage 2? How does it look in Gaza? What stops another October 7th?
If Hamas does not disarm.
Right.
I'm not concerned about another October 7th. I'm concerned about 2 million people who are homeless, who have nothing, no future, no past, no present. We cannot always focus only on ourselves. There is a people there who went through hell. None of us can even imagine what hell they went through. And now it's their time to have some rehabilitation. And the question is, how do we get to this rehabilitation? I don't care, by the way, if it will solve the problem or not. There is a huge humanitarian problem in Gaza which must be solved.
Gideon, if Hamas does not disarm,
it will not disarm. I tell you now, it will not.
Do you go on to the reconstruction and basically let that go and allow reconstruction to happen?
What is the alternative?
While Hamas is ruling Gaza?
What is the alternative? For 2 years, Israel tried to crush Hamas with all the weapons, with the legal and the illegal operations, and nothing came out. Hamas is alive and kicking. You have to draw the conclusions of it. You think that after another 2 years you'll get it? You will not get it.
Do you believe that Israel is more secure today than it was on?
No, I totally disagree. I think that a lot was accomplished in those 2 years, and I think that, Gideon, you're ignoring all the decades up to those last 2 years. And we've tried again and again to rehabilitate Gaza, and billions of dollars and shekels and euros went into the Strip for reconstruction, rehabilitation, and Hamas. I mean, you should be angry at Hamas, not at Israel, for all the devastation in the Strip. But this brings us back to Iran, Maayan, because I think that, there are many pieces to this puzzle. Hezbollah, the Houthis in Yemen, the militias in Iraq. And Iran is the head of the octopus. And again, everything is connected. I think Israel is much safer. We've really taken out a lot of Hamas, a lot of Hezbollah. We haven't finished the job. This isn't the end of the story. However, Iran definitely needs dealing with, because without that, we need to cut off all the funding to these terrorist groups. It's all happening in tandem.
You mentioned the pieces of the puzzle. I would suggest that another piece of the puzzle is the upcoming Israeli elections, which must be held by October. Now, Gideon is saying that the government in Gaza essentially wants to restart the war, maybe on better terms, no hostages, maybe you can do more against Hamas.